Hey, how you doing?
Who are you?
I'm your Uncle Buck.
Do I have an uncle?
Unfortunately, oh no. The luckiest thing that can happen to a kid is having an uncle like Buck. There was a time when all of America was jealous of Miles Russell because John Candy was the uncle we always wished we had. Uncle Buck came out in 1989, and it tells the story of a sloppy bachelor who has to look after 3 kids, and it was both a big box office hit and a little gem from the John Hughes era. But the real treasure is the truths surrounding the movie that time buried away. From roles that almost went to somebody else to a radio call that made John Hughes furious, 10 minutes of lost footage, an Indian remake, and one tiny detail that changed the direction of Hollywood's future, it is all in today's list. Do not miss a single second. And before we get into the first fact, let me take a second to honor John Candy. He will always be remembered and loved. Number 20. A weird casting switch almost linked Uncle Buck to the Flintstones. I am telling you, this is the kind of behind-the-scenes story that gets stranger the more you sit with it. People remember Uncle Buck like that role could only ever belong to John Candy. And yet, there was actually a time when John Goodman was being considered for Buck. Just that thought alone is enough to make me stop for a second, because Goodman had the big frame, the rough around the edges quality, and that gruff presence that really fit this kind of character. He could have done Buck in a completely different way. But the strangest part comes after that. A few years later, John Goodman ended up becoming Fred Flintstone in The Flintstones in 1994. And the ironic part is John Candy had also been considered for that exact role of Fred. Think about that for a second. Everything almost switched tracks. The man who almost got Buck later became Fred. And the man who turned Buck into somebody nobody could forget almost stepped into Fred Flintstone's world. And this is the part that makes the whole thing feel both strange and painful to me. John Candy died way too early in 1994, so that door closed for good, not because he turned it down, not because he was not right for it, but because he never got the chance anymore. Number 19. It was Uncle Buck that made John Hughes start thinking a child could carry a whole movie. This is where Uncle Buck gets strange in a really hard to predict way.
I don't have one.
How come?
You were talking about a movie
Don't have
with
one.
John Candy right there in the middle of the frame, a man so big, so loud, so magnetic, that the second he walks through the door, the whole scene changes rhythm. Normally, this should have been the kind of movie that made a director think more about adult roles like Buck. But John Hughes saw something completely different. He said that while making Uncle Buck, he realized he really liked working with kids on screen. Up to that point, that still sounds pretty normal. The thing that sends the story in a whole other direction is what came right after. Hughes started wondering whether a 9-year-old kid could carry an entire movie. That is the real turn worth talking about. Not because the kids in the movie were cute, not because they softened the story, but because in the middle of a film that felt like it was built for John Candy to take over everybody's attention, Hughes saw a totally different possibility flashing from the kids instead. I guess that is how truly gifted minds work. They are doing one thing, but inside their head, they are already quietly seeing another door the rest of us have not even noticed yet. And the strange thing is, from one little thought like that, everything that came after went way farther than Uncle Buck itself. Let us open up number 18 right now. Number 18, Uncle Buck got almost completely swallowed up by the movie that came after it. These days, people talk about this movie like one of the classic gems from the late 80s, so the natural reaction is to think it must have dominated its own era too. But no, the truth is way stranger than that. Uncle Buck was not a failure at all. It got a wide release, opened at number 1, made really good money, and for any studio, that is the kind of win that gets the champagne opened. If the story had stopped there, the movie could have comfortably taken its place as a major hit. But Hollywood almost never lets things stay that simple. Then, Home Alone showed up. And from that moment on, the balance of memory got bent almost completely out of shape. A movie that had once won big suddenly got pushed back and started feeling like the warm-up for the earthquake that came after it. That is the part that makes this story really weird to me. Not because Uncle Buck was small, it was not small at all. It is just that what came after was so massive, It basically swallowed the glow of a movie that should have been more than big enough to live a long life on its own. And the funny part is, behind a movie that feels this warm, the set was not always as calm as people might think. Number 17. John Hughes once canceled John Candy's scenes just because of one night out at a bar. You probably will not believe what I'm about to say, but it is true. One night during filming, John Candy went to a bar with music supervisor Tarquin Gotch. He did not just stop by for fun. He stayed a while, met people, talked to everybody, basically being the kind of John Candy who made strangers feel like they had known him forever. Then the next day, somebody called into a radio show and excitedly talked about what a great night they had with Candy. And that is when the trouble started. John Hughes heard it. He went crazy. This is where it gets really interesting. Hughes did not see it as some little thing he could let slide. He straight up canceled Candy's scenes for that day and told him to go clean himself up, get enough sleep, and only then come back to shoot. Candy, though, did not just back down. He argued that Buck was supposed to look messy, supposed to look run down, supposed to have that vibe of a guy stepping out of a life that was never very organized in the first place, because that is what made him Buck. Think about that. That is what is really strange here. The movie gives us this lovable, messy uncle, but behind the camera, there was a director controlling things so hard that he would not let the messiness go 1 inch past the limit he allowed. And in a funny way, even with clashes like that, the movie still went out and became a real hit. Number 16. Uncle Buck hit theaters like a winner, even though the press was not fully on its side. Looking back after all these years, I can say Uncle Buck had a really strange fate. Now, people remember it like an old familiar favorite. Almost anybody who grew up in the late 80s knows exactly what it is. So it is easy to assume that when it first came out, it must have been loved right away, praised right away, welcomed, like something that could not lose. But no, the real story is way stranger than that. Uncle Buck did not come into theaters in any small way. It opened in 1,804 theaters, then expanded to a widest release of 1,835 theaters. Right on its opening weekend, it went straight to the #1 spot at the box office. That alone would have been enough to make any studio breathe easy. This was not some quiet release. This was a movie that won big right out of the gate. But the press did not completely go along with it. Roger Ebert only gave it 1.5 out of 4, and he felt there was something in the film that was a little unpleasant. Not as warm as people expected from John Hughes. Even now, Metacritic still keeps the movie in that mixed reaction zone. When you think about it, that is pretty hard to believe. A movie audiences pushed all the way to the top was not fully embraced by critics from the start. And maybe that mismatch is exactly what makes Uncle Buck even more memorable, because behind a win like that, the movie still had pieces hidden away that audiences never really got to see. Are you curious? Number 15. People tracked down 10 minutes of lost Uncle Buck footage. You would think this movie had already been watched so much there was nothing left to uncover. But no, Uncle Buck still had 10 minutes of lost footage that got tracked down from a rough cut, and that alone is enough to make old movie fans light up. Joe Ramone said he learned about a VHS tape that had the footage on it, and it had ended up with somebody connected to the production, and from there he was able to track down the exact thing nobody thought they still had a chance to see. To me, this is not just one of those, oh, the movie had deleted scene stories. Every movie has that. The real thing here is that a movie so familiar, it feels like there should be nothing left to discover, still had a piece of its own body hidden somewhere outside the audience's sight. And once you know that, it is hard to look at Uncle Buck the same way again. I love that feeling. It makes an old movie suddenly come back to life, like somebody just cracked it open yesterday. And the funny part is, some things in Uncle Buck were never lost at all. They were sitting right there from the beginning. It is just that nobody knew what they were looking at yet. Number 14. John Hughes gave the hardest role to a 16-year-old girl who had barely ever acted before. Out of the 3 kids in Uncle Buck, Tia was the riskiest role if they got the casting wrong. This girl could not just stand there looking annoyed and call it a day, and she could not just be there to make John Candy shine brighter either. Tia had to be sharp enough to push Buck back cold enough for the audience to believe she really could not stand him, but still keep something real enough that viewers would not completely turn against her. And that is exactly the role John Hughes handed to John Louisa Kelly when she was just 16 and had almost no major screen experience. That was not the safe kind of casting choice. That was throwing a very new face into the exact spot where weakness would show fastest, then asking her to stand firm in front of a force as big as John Candy. If she had been even a little unsure, the whole emotional line between Buck and the kids could have slipped off balance. Kelly later said Uncle Buck was basically the first time she had really stepped into the world of movies, and she even had to screen test with Candy himself before she got the part. Then, right in the middle of filming, she turned 17. Hughes and Candy gave her a cake that said she was just 17. Pretty interesting, right? Number 13, Chris Columbus still auditioned 200 kids even though the answer may have already been right in front of him. Sounds like classic Hollywood, right? John Hughes had pretty much spotted Macaulay Culkin very early, especially after Uncle Buck. Chris Columbus felt it too, but feeling it is one thing and locking it in right away is another. He still had to go through a long process, watch. Endless audition tapes, meet about 200 other kids, and only then circle back to the exact name Hughes had probably already been leaning toward from the start. That is the beauty of this story. It is not that they failed to see Culkin was bright enough. It is that on projects this big, people always want to be sure one more time and then one more time after that. So the whole machine keeps going out to find a boy who might be better than Culkin, while the answer is almost standing right there in front of them. When you think about it, it is kind of funny. Sometimes the thing that takes the longest is not finding the star. It is accepting that you probably met him earlier than you thought. Number 12. The house in Uncle Buck was actually built inside a school. If you only look at the movie, the house in Uncle Buck feels so real. So lived in, so perfectly like a family home where the second an uncle like Buck walks in, everything starts getting thrown off balance. That is exactly why the truth behind it is kind of funny to me. The space audiences remember so well did not just happen naturally. John Hughes picked the abandoned New Trier West High School in Northfield as the headquarters for the whole production, then turned it into a little filmmaking machine just for Uncle Buck. 3 school gymnasiums got turned into sound stages, and right inside them they built the 2-story interior of the Russell House along with Buck's room. The more I know, that the more I feel like movies really do have some beautiful tricks. They give you a house that feels full of real life, but behind the curtain, it is all this really skillful stage construction. And there is another great part. John Candy did not just walk onto the set and do the scene, he also gave input on how Buck's bachelor pad should be dressed with sports stuff signs of gambling, horse racing, and even 2 televisions, all to make him feel like a sloppy guy, but a real one. That is exactly why Buck's space ends up feeling like it has such a soul of its own. Number 11. A very American uncle got turned into a Malayalam version. When you watch this movie, it is easy to feel like it is too American, too Chicago, too deeply John Hughes to travel anywhere else. And yet, just 2 years later, it had another life in India. In 1991, Uncle Buck was remade into a Malayalam film called Uncle Bun, directed by Badran with Mohanlal in the lead role. Buck became Charlie Chaco there, and just seeing a Buck-type uncle living inside a totally different world is already strange enough to make the story fascinating. It is kind of funny when you think about it. A movie that looks like it should never travel anywhere ended up going that far. And honestly, have any of you ever seen Uncle Bun? If you have, I would really love to know what it felt like seeing a Buck version living in such a completely different world. Number 10. Amy Madigan had the toughest time in the movie because John Candy was too good at improvising. In the movie, Chanice is the one who has to put up with Buck the most. She has to look at this uncle like he is a walking headache, always ready to do something impulsive, say too much, then turn everything into a mess. But in real life, Amy Madigan had to deal with an even more exhausting version than that. Not Buck on the page, but John Candy outside the frame. Madigan remembered that Candy really was the king of ad-libs, the kind of actor who could toss in one extra line, one little gesture, or just one perfectly timed reaction, and the whole rhythm of a scene would change. The funny part is what that did to everybody else. There were scenes where Chanice had to stay mad at Buck, had to keep a totally serious face, but Candy, standing off camera, could still make Madigan almost break and laugh. She said herself that sometimes it was really hard to keep a straight face because he kept wrecking the rhythm with that natural charm of his. It sounds fun, but anybody who has ever had to play a serious scene opposite somebody who is way too funny probably gets it. That is a real professional test. Number 9, ABC tried to bring Uncle Buck back, but it only lasted one season. Hollywood has a habit it just cannot quit. The second it sees an old character still living in the audience's memory sooner or later, it wants to bring that person back one more time. Uncle Buck did not escape that either. In 2016, ABC brought the movie back to television with Mike Epps playing Buck and James LaSure in the main cast. A misfit uncle, a family that needs somebody to watch the kids a pile of problems every time he walks into the room. The formula was clear, easy to understand, and it sounded like exactly the kind of thing that should work as a sitcom. But this is the part that is kind of funny. Retelling the story is not the hard part. Recreating Buck's soul is the hard part. Because Buck is not just a character on paper, he is also the rhythm, the warmth, that weird kind of charm where he looks messy at first, but the longer he stays around, the more you end up loving him. The 2016 version tried to bring that spirit back, but in the end, ABC still canceled the series after one season. Kind of brutal, honestly. A character who lived that long in the audience's memory came back on modern television and only made it one season. But that is Hollywood. Some things look easy to reboot. Then when you actually do it, you find out that just bringing back the old name does not magically bring the old magic back too. Number 8, weather that was too warm pushed Uncle Buck from Missouri to Chicago. It really is kind of funny. Some movies change locations because of money, because of scheduling, because of stars. Uncle Buck, if you go by the behind-the-scenes story people keep repeating, had to move for a reason that feels even more real than that the weather just would not get cold when it needed to. At first, this story was supposed to be set in St. Louis, but that year, the weather in Missouri was too warm for a movie that needed the exact feel of a Midwestern winter. So the production had to move over to the Chicago area to get the cold atmosphere the movie needed. What is great about that is it sounds small, but it actually affected the soul of the movie a lot. Uncle Buck needs cold. You can see with your own eyes. It needs those streets, those houses, that sky, and that chill in the air. Just strong enough for a sloppy guy like Buck to walk in and throw a whole family off balance. If the weather is too warm, the whole vibe slips right away. In other words, in this movie, weather is not just background. It is part of the personality. Number 7. Hollywood passed on Tim Allen for Uncle Buck, then had to watch him blow up right after. There is a casting story around Uncle Buck that sounds both funny and a little painful. Tim Allen was once one of the names floating around the role of Buck, but the studio supposedly did not feel safe enough to bet on him, simply because at that point, he was still too new. To put it bluntly, they saw somebody who might fit the part, but they did not believe the name was big enough yet to carry a movie like that. Looking back, it feels like pure Hollywood. Just a few years later, the guy they thought was not big enough was suddenly everywhere. Home Improvement blew up starting in 1991. The Santa Claus came in 1994. Then Toy Story showed up in 1995. It all happened so fast, it almost felt like Hollywood shut the door in his face, turned around, and suddenly saw him become one of the defining faces of American family entertainment from that whole era. Number 6. Buck almost walks into the movie to the rhythm of Wild Thing. Some characters do not need to say much before the audience already knows exactly how badly they are about to throw this house off balance. Buck is like that, and Uncle Buck almost tells you that ahead of time through the music. Wild Thing by Tone Loc is in the movie, so every time Buck shows up, the air around him sounds just a little off rhythm, a little mischievous, like Calm and Order are already packing their bags and getting ready to leave. What I love about this detail is that the movie does not need to stop and explain what kind of person Buck is. Nobody has to say this uncle is really unusual. The music does that job all by itself. It gives him this sneaky little momentum. Slightly messy, slightly unruly, exactly the kind of man who walks into a place and makes structure start feeling nervous. So Buck is not just written through dialogue or through the way John Candy walks. He is also written through the musical rhythm that follows him. And that is the kind of small detail that is incredibly valuable because the audience may not be able to name it, but their ears already felt all of it. And if you like little details like that too, take 1 second to like the video before we step into the final 5 facts. Number 5. The mail slot scene was scripted, but John Hughes still let the actors play with it. You remember this scene, right? On screen, it feels really natural. Shanice is standing outside the door while Miles times his replies through the mail slot, that little kid kind of thing, where just looking at it already feels annoying and funny at the same time. But the great part is that this scene was already in the script. It was not something that just happened on set. John Hughes only did one very smart thing. He did not lock it down too tightly. He let the actors loosen it up, bounce off each other a little more, and that is exactly what made the scene come alive. The thing I love even more is that the kid holding his own in that rhythm was Macaulay Culkin when he was still very little. Amy Madigan remembered that even at that age, he was a real pro, not intimidated at all, not falling behind, and able to catch the rhythm cleanly. Kind of funny to think about. Number 4. The clown in Uncle Buck was played by a guy known for tough guy roles. In Uncle Buck, that clown who instantly makes the audience feel like something is off, Pooter the Clown was played by Mike Starr. And if you already know Mike Starr's face, this is where it gets really funny. He is not the kind of actor people naturally picture when they hear the word clown. Mike Starr is the kind of face audiences usually remember from very different roles. Harder roles, heavier roles. The kind where he walks into a scene and you immediately smell trouble. IMDb makes it clear that he is Uncle Buck's Pooter the Clown. That is where the little joke really sits. A man usually tied to tough or at least vaguely dangerous roles gets stuffed into a birthday clown costume. That is why Pooter in the movie feels so weird in a hard-to-explain way. Not just because the scene is built to be funny, but because the face inside that clown costume belongs to an actor known from movies like Dumb and Dumber Ed Wood and Miller's Crossing. So the more you know who Mike Starr is, the funnier the scene gets in a whole different way. Did any of you spot him right away when you watched it? Number 3. Laurie Metcalf came into the movie nervous. Then John Candy did something nobody expected. Laurie Metcalf remembered that when she came into Uncle Buck, she was pretty nervous. At that point, she did not have much film experience, and now she had to stand there with John Candy, a man so famous for improvising fast that if you got off rhythm even a little, he could completely sweep you away. Just hearing that already sounds intimidating, but the best part of the story is somewhere else. Metcalf quickly realized that John Candy had his own worries too. He did not walk onto the set with that attitude of, I am the star, everybody else can figure it out. It was the opposite. He read people's moods really fast. And the second he realized his scene partner was tense, he would start doing whatever he could to make things lighter so the other person would not feel so overwhelmed. Number 2. Some VHS releases of Uncle Buck changed the poster to push the two child stars forward. This is such a small but funny detail. On some later VHS releases, the Uncle Buck. Promotional art got changed pretty aggressively. The adult family members were taken off the poster, and the main focus behind the door was narrowed down to just Macaulay Culkin and Gabby Hoffman. That little move says a lot about how Hollywood sells movies. When a child star starts pulling more attention, especially after Macaulay Culkin blew up the poster, starts knowing exactly which way it needs to lean. So a movie that was originally sold through John Candy and this chaotic family energy eventually got pushed more in the direction of look at these two kids, because that became the easier hook. Number 1, why Uncle Buck suddenly gets talked about so much again. Uncle Buck has been getting brought up a lot in recent years, not just because of late 80s nostalgia. A huge part of it comes from the wave of people looking back at John Candy, especially after the documentary John Candy I Like Me was chosen as the opening film for the 50th edition of TIFF. That alone was enough to put his name back in front of audiences, and once people start talking about John Candy Uncle Buck, almost always gets brought up too. But the part that really hits people is tied to Macaulay Culkin. In that documentary, Culkin says John Candy was one of the first people to recognize that his father had problems and that Candy quietly looked out for him on the Uncle Buck set. Just one detail, like that is enough to change the color of the movie when you look back at it. Suddenly, it is not just a family comedy with a sloppy uncle who is incredibly charming. It becomes a place where people start seeing more clearly just how warm John Candy really was in real life. So that is all 20 of the strangest facts about Uncle Buck. And what I love about this movie is that the deeper you dig, the more it stops being just a family comedy. When I was little, I remember watching it just to laugh, because John Candy was so funny, so loud, so perfectly the kind of man who could walk into a room and tilt everything sideways. But watching it again as an adult feels completely different. Uncle Buck is still funny, still warm, still incredibly easy to watch. But underneath all that messy, goofy energy is a story that reaches kids who need somebody to really see them, need an adult to protect them, need a kind of protection that is quiet but very real. That is what has kept this movie alive in people's hearts for so long. Now I want to hear from you out of these 20 facts, which one surprised you the most? And to you, is Uncle Buck just a nostalgic comedy, or is it the kind of movie that changed color when you watched it again as an adult? If you know another great detail about the film that I did not mention, leave it in the comments. And do not forget to subscribe so we can keep digging up old movies that still have way too many good stories left to tell.